Hi everyone, it's Hannah from Hand Jam Crochet, and today we are making together this really easy raglan top-down crochet sweater together. Now I have a children's version of this which has been hugely popular over the last few years, and I have lots and lots of requests for the adult one, so here it is. In the description below you'll find all the links and information for where to find the pattern and also what materials you'll need, but we'll also chat through those together now. To make the sweater, I chose to use Premier Yarn's Everyday DK. It's an acrylic yarn and we get 273 yards, that's 250 meters in a 100 gram ball. It's a DK, so category 3 weight yarn, and the color that I'm using here today is khaki. All the amounts that you'll need for each of the sizes from extra small through to 5XL is in the description below and in the written pattern for you. Along with your yarn, you're going to need a 4mm crochet hook or the hook that matches the gauge for you. And then you'll need a pair of scissors, a needle for your ends and a couple of stitch markers too. So go grab your supplies, find that written pattern, decide on the size that you're going to make, and then meet me back here so that we can begin. Before we begin our yoke together, I wanted to quickly show you what the sweater looks like in real life when it's completed so that you can work out the construction with me. So we're going to make from the top downwards what's called a raglan yoke. Now when this is laid flat it looks something that I can't fit on the whole thing like this. So we have a square hole in the middle and then we're going to work outwards in continuous rounds around so that we're then going to end up with these 4 sides as a rectangle, one for the front, one for the back, and they will be obviously slightly bigger, and then we have 2 sides that are slightly smaller and they become the sleeves. And then when we're ready to, which this one almost is, we can fold it over like this so that this becomes our neckline and these are our sleeves here, and then the body works downwards from this point. So then on the finished one that we have here, this is where we then change our stitch, but as we go through you'll see that you can change that wherever you would like to. And then you work the body downwards in rounds again until we get to the bottom where we add a cuff, and then the sleeves work in a really similar way from where the raglan ends. We then add these sleeves on in rounds in the same way that we do the body, and then we pop some cuffs on at the end there. So that's a whistle stop tour of what we're going to be doing together today. So to begin our yoke, we need to create this center rectangle that we have here, and then from that we're going to carry on in rounds working this yoke. You'll see in the pattern that different sizes need a slightly different neck hole, so make sure that you go for the size that you would like to be making. And the size that I'm making, this larger size here that I'm making, started with 34-14 as your neck and then your sleeves. What I'm going to show you now though is a small amount of numbers for your fronts and backs and sleeves, so that you can then apply this theory to the numbers in the pattern that relate to the size you're making. To begin our yoke, we are going to put a slip knot on the hook, and then we're going to start by chaining 2. And our first row is made up of foundation half double crochet stitches. So in order to do those, we're going to work into the first chain that we made, but I'm going to encourage us to work into the back bump of that. So with yarn over, we're going to put our hook into that back bump. Then we're going to yarn over and pull through. Then we yarn over and we pull through just 1 to begin with, and we yarn over again and we pull through all 3, and that's our first foundation half double crochet made. And because we just yarned over and pulled through just 1, we've now created a chain here, and that's where we're going to now work our next stitch into. So for our second stitch, we're going to yarn over and we're going to work into that chain that we created here. So we need to make sure that we go through and we have both parts of the stitch laying across our hook there. We're going to yarn over and pull through, and now we need to make a chain ready for the next stitch to go into. So we're going to pull through just 1, and then we yarn over and we pull through all 3 there. So that's 2 foundation crochet half double crochets made, sorry. And then for the size that you're making, you carry on working the number that you need to. So for me, this is going to be the side of the sleeve. So I'll just do a random amount so that you can then see the shape that we're going to be making. So you'll see in the pattern there are a slightly different number of stitches depending on the size that you're making, but let's imagine that that's one of the sizes of the sleeves. When you've done all of the stitches that you need for this first sleeve, what we're going to do is we're going to chain one, and we just chain one before we do our next stitch, but the next stitch actually just goes into that chain that we made there. So the only difference that we have is that we've done a chain one and now we're going to carry on, and that chain one will become one of the corners of our rectangle. So we now carry on working our foundation half double crochet stitches, and you do that for the amount that it tells you for the size that you're making. So I think in this green one here, I need to check my numbers, but in the green one I did 34 for the fronts and the back. But as I say, obviously check on in the pattern for the size that you're making. Then when you've done the amount that you need for this front that we have here, we're going to then chain one, and then we're going to carry on, and we're going to work a matching number as we did for this first sleeve here. So the pattern will tell you exactly how many, but if you're worried, just make sure that you count again here to make sure that you've done the right number before you carry on to the next sleeve. So off we go working our next sleeve here. Then when you've done that second sleeve, we're ready to chain one again, and then we're going to work the back. So it's going to be the same number of stitches as you did for the front here. So when you've got those stitches, we need to then chain one, and then we're ready to slip stitch into this first stitch that we have here. This is the only time that we're going to slip stitch to join our rounds. The rest of our rounds are going to be worked in continuous rounds, so we don't need to join. So at the end of round one, it should look something like this, but obviously a lot bigger. Now for round two, we're going to begin working our herringbone half double crochet stitches, and they're very similar to half double crochet stitches. We just have one difference in them. So we're going to work our first herringbone half double crochet in that first stitch that we just joined to. So we yarn over and we pop our hook through. We yarn over and we pull through, and actually as we pull through we carry on and pull through that first loop on the hook, and then we yarn over and we pull through too, and that's our first herringbone half double crochet stitch made. So you see the difference is we yarn over and we pop through, yarn over, and as soon as we pull that through we pull through that first loop as well, and then we yarn over and we pull through too. And that's what gives us this lovely little extra little fleck here. So we yarn over, pop into the stitch, yarn over and pull through that first, and then we yarn over and pull through two. And that's all there is to it really. My top tip with these stitches is to twist your work. And so rather than trying to bring it through the front here of your stitch, which is a bit fiddly and I couldn't work out what to say there, a bit fiddly, what I like to do is I twist the work so that you've got more space there at the back of the stitch. So work one of those in each of the stitches up until you get to this chain one space that we have here. And for all of the subsequent rounds now on the yoke, we're going to do the same thing in this chain one space, and that is we're going to work a herringbone half double crochet, a chain one, and a herringbone half double crochet all into that same chain one space that we have there. So let's begin with one herringbone half double crochet, a chain one, and then we do another herringbone half double crochet all into that chain one space. And then all we now need to do is work a herringbone half double crochet in each of these stitches up until we get to the next chain one space. And the key here, the trick with this is once you've done one of those corner stitches or chain one spaces there, don't forget to find this stitch that's underneath, because this is the first stitch of that row now. So we work a herringbone half double crochet in there and just work in every stitch up until you get to that chain one space. And you'll probably have guessed what we do there because I just told you. Now we've arrived at our next chain one space, we're going to work a herringbone half double crochet, a chain one, and a herringbone half double crochet into it. So every chain one space gets that into it. And then we carry on working a herringbone half double crochet in each of the stitches up until our next chain one space. So carry on there, and then we work our corner here, and then carry on until we get to the last, and then meet me back here and I'll show you what we do to carry on to the next round. So here I am, I've arrived back at that chain one space, the last chain one space that we have, and I'm going to do just what we've been doing. So a herringbone half double crochet, a chain one, and a herringbone half double crochet all into that last chain one space. And then here we are back at this first stitch of the round, but rather than slip stitch to join, we're now just going to carry on working in continuous rounds. So we put a herringbone half double crochet straight into that stitch, that first one, and then we continue just as we've been doing. You're going to work a half double crochet herringbone, I've said that the wrong way around, a herringbone half double crochet in each of the stitches up until you get to the chain one space. But now would be the point to pop your stitch marker in that first stitch, she says, she can't find her stitch markers, so that we don't lose our place. So here it is, that's our first stitch that we have there. Pop that in so we don't get lost, and that is pretty much all you need to know for the entire yoke. We're going to carry on working these stitches, a stitch for every stitch, and then in every chain one space we are going to work that herringbone half double crochet, chain one, and a herringbone half double crochet. Then when you finish the round, you're going to carry on in continuous rounds and just move your stitch marker up. So here's our next chain one space that we've come to. So we're going to work a herringbone half double crochet, chain one, and a herringbone half double crochet there. So that's all we need to know for making the entire yoke. You now need to carry on as is written in the pattern for the amount of rounds that it tells you for the size that you're making. So this size, I can't remember how many this, and I'm deliberately not telling you numbers for anything in particular because they are all so different. So you really do need to have access to the pattern to work alongside this. So work the amount of rounds that it tells you for the size that you're making up until you get to where it says split for the sleeves, and then meet me back here and we will split for the sleeves. Now that I've worked all the rounds that I need to for my yoke, I am ready to take my stitch marker out of my first stitch there, and I'm going to slip stitch into it so that I now join everything, and I'm going to break my yarn because we now need to add a small back extension and do our splitting for the sleeve. So break your yarn here and pull that through. That will mark where we are for us. And then what we need to do is figure out which your back is going to be for you. Once you've done that, we now need to go and find the chain one space that is nearest us, which is this one that we have here. And in this chain one space, we are going to join our yarn, and we're going to create our first underarm chain here. So this side that we have here is our sleeve, that's our first sleeve. So we're going to create a chain, and then we're going to join to this chain one space here. So keep those in mind together here. So we join our yarn here to this chain one space, and for the size that we're making, we're going to chain 4. but do make sure to look out in the pattern because it's different for different sizes. Now obviously we've got the right side facing us still because we're still going to be working with the right side to us, and then into this chain one space that we have here we are going to be working a herringbone half double crochet stitch. So into that chain one space, I'll show you how it looks in a minute when it's all flattened out, but into that next chain one space. So we've now got a sleeve, an armhole and an underarm chain that we have here. So now we're going to be working a herringbone half double crochet stitch in each of these stitches along this back, as we're calling it. And it is important that this is now the back because we're adding this one extra little row that will give it just a little bit of length at the back. It's a bit of a shaping tactic so that it raises the back of the sweater just ever so slightly for just a slightly nicer fit for you. Go ahead and work a herringbone half double crochet in each of these stitches up until you get to the next chain one space. So this will be the whole of the back of the sweater that you'll be working along until the next chain one space. So here I am at the next chain one space and I'm going to work a herringbone half double crochet in it, and then I'm going to chain 4 ready for our next underarm space. And so then skipping all of these stitches of the sleeve, we're then going to find our next chain one space and we are going to slip stitch into it. And that is our splitting for the sleeves done. We do need to continue now, but I'm going to suggest that we break our yarn here because this is now the front of our sweater. Although there isn't a seam, I want us to do everything we can to avoid any notches or anything. So break your yarn and pull it through. And then this is a great opportunity to try on your yoke. And if you're making it for yourself, or if you've got the person near you that you're making it for, get them to try it on and see how it fits and feels for them. And you'll see the extra row kind of thing that we just added there means that this part, your neckline, the back of the neckline sits just slightly higher, and that's as it should be. That's an intentional design feature just so that we get a slightly different fit. Now we've split for the sleeves, we're now ready to just start working the body. So we're not going to be working in these sleeve and armhole bits here. We're just going to be working, she says just, in these body stitches that we have here. So in order to begin that, I will encourage us to start working back where we began this very first underarm chain here. So we have 1, 2, 3 and 4. So I'm going to join to this first one that we have here. So join, and I'm going to chain 1 to get me going there. And I'm going to work same as we have been, a herringbone half double crochet stitch in each of these chains to begin with. So 4 of those. And then we get to the stitches of the back here. So I'm going to work a herringbone half double crochet in each of these stitches all the way across the back. And by rejoining here and starting, then our join is always going to be underneath the arm here, so it'll be nicely hidden, and it will travel across in this direction up until we start doing our moss stitch. So don't worry, you can work from this point onwards, you can work as many or as few rounds in this stitch as you like, but I'm going to do, I think, probably 2 or 3 rounds before I then start working the herringbone moss stitch for the body. So work one of these stitches in every chain or stitch all the way around the body. So we'll carry on all the way until we get to this other chain 4 that's under the other sleeve, and then when you've worked into those 4, you're then going to work all the way around the front until you get back to where we just began. So then here I am back at the beginning of the round, and I've got my underarm chain here, and I'm going to carry on working for I think 2 more rounds in this way. So we do it in the same way that we did with the yoke, in continuous rounds. So we go straight into that first stitch with a herringbone half double crochet. So hard to keep everything out of the way, sorry. And then carry on all the way around. So your stitch count will remain the same for all of your body rounds now. And don't forget to put your stitch marker in your first stitch there so that we don't lose track. And as I say, I'm going to do 2 more rounds, I think, like this before I start working the moss stitch, but it's entirely up to you. You can work as many rounds of this as you like now, but it will affect the tension because the 2 areas have slightly different gauge and tension. So you'll then have to work out your length yourself, but that's a lot easier to do on this now because you're doing it top down, so you can make it any length that you like. But if you'd like to do it the same as I have, then work 2 more rounds of this and then meet me back here before you start working the next round, and I'll show you how we do the herringbone moss section. Now I've done those 3 rounds, I'm ready to start working the herringbone moss stitch section. So to do that, I'm going to take out my stitch marker and I'm going to slip stitch into that first stitch to join, just to set us up. So now I'm going to chain 1 and I'm going to work a herringbone half double crochet in that very first stitch. And then this round we're actually going to then chain 1 and we're going to skip the next stitch, and then we're going to work a herringbone half double crochet in the next. And then we're going to chain 1, we're going to skip 1 and then herringbone half double crochet in the next. So each of the sizes will have a multiple of 2 here at this point. So this will work all the way around, working one of these herringbone half double crochet stitches, chaining 1, then skipping 1, and then working into the next stitch there. So work all the way around for this round, and now when we get back to the beginning, we are going to slip stitch in the first stitch to join, and we're going to do that throughout now. So work around for this first round of the herringbone moss stitch, and then meet me back at the end and I'll show you what we do for the next round. Here I am back at the start, and I've chained 1 and I'm going to skip that last stitch that we have there, and then I'm going to slip stitch into this first stitch to join. And what I'm going to do with that slip stitch is I'm going to pull it nice and tight. Then what we're going to do is we're going to chain 2. Now the chain 1 is just to get us started, and then the second chain of those 2 chains, that's hard to say, is useful for us on the next round. So that's kind of the space that you're going to create, because what we're going to now do is skip the stitch that is underneath us. That chain at the top there counts as part of this stitch. And what we're going to now do is work our herringbone half double crochet moss stitch in the next skip stitch 2 rounds below. So it's below this chain 1 space. We're going into this stitch that we have here, and we're actually going into the back loop only of this stitch. So we're going to go over the top of this chain 1. We're going to go into the back loop of this stitch that we have here. We're going to yarn over and we'll work a herringbone half double crochet in that one there, and then we're going to chain 1. So then we skip this next stitch and then we work into the back loop only of the stitch 2 rounds below. So working over the top of that chain 1 that we have there, make sure you encase that in it, and we work a herringbone half double crochet, and we carry on all the way around. We chain 1, we skip the next stitch, and then we work this herringbone half double crochet over the top of that chain 1 and into the back loop only of the stitch 2 rounds below. Chain 1 and then work into the back loop of this stitch 2 rounds below. And we just carry on all the way around, working in this way up until you get back to the first stitch. At the end of that round then, we get back to our chain 2 that we started with, and we're going to ignore the first chain, and we're going to actually just slip stitch into that second chain there. And the next round we're going to chain 1, and now we're ready to work a herringbone moss stitch down into this stitch 2 rounds below. So we're going to go over the top of that chain 1 that we're attached to, and we're going to work a herringbone moss stitch into that first one. That first one is always a bit tricky, so just take your time. And then we're going to chain 1, we're going to skip the next stitch, and then we're ready to work our herringbone moss stitch down into the back loop of the next stitch. And then we're going to chain 1, and that's the repeat for this round. Then we're going to skip the next stitch, then we're going to work our half double crochet herringbone, can't work out if I've said that the right way around, moss stitch into the next one, we'll chain 1, we'll skip 1. So work all the way around, and then you'll be ready to slip stitch into that first stitch again to join, and then you're just going to carry on repeating the last 2 rounds that we've had. So you're going to start the next round with a chain 2, which gives you a chain 1 space, and then you're going to work into the skipped one that you have there, and then you're going to repeat this round again. So you're either going to begin your round with a moss stitch like we have with this one, or you're going to begin your round with a chain 2, which then gives you a chain 1 space for the next round to work over and into. So we're just creating spaces and then slotting the stitches in over the top of those chain 1 spaces as we go around. And that, dare I say it, is pretty much all you need for the rest of the body of the sweater. The only difference will be when we get to the final round, and we, rather than adding chain 1 spaces, we will close those gaps. So I've worked all but one of the rounds that I need to for the size that I'm making here, but this is the point where you can change the length of your sweater if you want to. So this is the bottom of the sweater. Obviously I've got my raglan here up at the top that works its way down, but you can carry on working this moss stitch up until it's the length that you want it, before we then add the ribbing on. So once you're happy with that length, it can be the same as I suggest in the pattern, or it can be different. It's entirely up to you. Now, the important thing to know here is that you may have finished on a different round to this, depending on which size you're making from the pattern, and indeed whether you've changed the length yourself. And that's absolutely fine, because the concept that we're going to be using here is literally just to not add chain 1 spaces anymore. What we're going to do instead is we're going to work single crochet stitches instead of those chain 1 spaces. So for this version, the way that that works is that we are going to be working a moss stitch here. So we chain 1, and then we work our herringbone half double crochet moss stitch, which goes into the back loop down there, just as you have been doing for the whole of the body. And then in the next stitch, you would normally be working a chain 1 in here, wouldn't you? We're not going to do that because we don't want to create any more chains or spaces for the next round, because there will be no next round. So instead, what we're going to do is we're just going to work a single crochet in the next stitch. So every time you come across a stitch, you're going to be putting a single crochet in it. And then the next stitch will get a half double crochet herringbone moss, which I always say the wrong way around, I'm really sorry. And then the next stitch will get a single crochet in it. So no chain 1 spaces anymore. We're just going to be closing up those gaps. So there's our next moss stitch, and there's our single crochet. So just work your way around for this whole round, working that. So either a herringbone half double crochet moss stitch, which I've said correctly, I think maybe, or a single crochet in the next. And then when you finish this round, slip stitch in your first stitch, and then meet me back and we'll talk about adding a rib. Once you've finished that final round, you are ready to add your bottom rib if you would like one. Now you'll see in my different versions that I've made different lengths of ribs, but I haven't done one without a rib at all, but you're very welcome to leave it off if you don't want to add it. But if you do, then you can add as long or as short as one as you like. As I say, the one that I have recommended for this kind of men's version is to have 14 stitches long or deep. So what I'm going to do to begin it is I'm going to chain 15. So you'll always need one more chain than the amount of stitches that you would like your rib to be. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. Once you've done your chain, you can swivel round to the side. Now, if this is on my lap, I would do this slightly differently, but because it's on a table, I like to swivel it round like this. And for this bottom rib, we're going to be using yarn over slip stitches. And the way that we work those, we're going to yarn over. It kind of says what it does, what it says on the tin. We yarn over. We're going to go into the back bump of the second chain from the hook. And then once we've done that, we yarn over, and then you're going to pull through everything. Now, this first one is sometimes a little tricky and doesn't want to do what you want it to do. So don't worry if that takes a bit of time. For our next stitch then, we yarn over, we go into that back bump, we yarn over, and we pull through everything. Now, I will say that these first ones on this first foundation chain are really, really tricky compared to all of the rest that you will do. Once you get these sorted, you will be absolutely flying. Now, you might have noticed there that I swivel when I go around. I turn to face here to the back of the stitch as I pull through. And that's because you generally have with these slip stitches, with a yarn over slip stitch and a regular slip stitch, you have more space at the back than you do at the front. So the front there doesn't have much space, but the back does. So it just gives you a bit more space and a bit more ease to get that stitch through. So do rotate if you find that that helps you too. Then when you've completed all of those stitches, you are going to, for this first time after the first row, slip stitch in just one stitch of the final round there. Before then you're ready to turn, and you don't have to turn the whole thing, just turn enough so that you can get to your stitches here. And we're going to work a yarn over slip stitch in the back loop only of all of these stitches. So rotate right over to find that back loop there. And remember just to swivel your work just to find that space that you have at the back. And so you'll work a yarn over slip stitch in the back loop of each of these stitches. At the end of that row then, I've turned, and now I'm going to chain one, and then I'm going to yarn over slip stitch in the back loop only of each of these stitches. So each row is just the same, a yarn over slip stitch in the back loop only. It's just what we do when we get to the end that's different depending on which direction you're going in. So if you get to this end, you just turn and chain one and off you go again. When we get to this end, we need to slip stitch into that final round of the sweater just to join it and move ourselves along around this bottom rib. So here we go, I've done all the stitches, and now what we need to do is from this row onwards, we're going to slip stitch in 2 stitches of the final round when we get to it. So there's 1, and then there's 2. And then you're ready to turn, and then you're just going to go for it again. You're going to yarn over slip stitch in the back loop of each of these stitches along. So your count will stay the same for all of your rows all the way around. And then when you get back to here again, we're going to slip stitch in 2, and you're just going to work all the way around the edge of the sweater, around that final round, working up until you come back to here and you slip stitch in this last stitch that we have here. Then when you get to there, meet me back and I'll just show you how we can seam the 2 together and complete that bottom rib band. So I have worked all the way around this bottom rib, and I'm now ready to slip stitch into these last stitches until I'm back around to the start again. And then what we need to do is we need to join these 2 ends, which we've got the same number of stitches on, to each other to join this bottom rib together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn as if I'm going to work another row, but I'm obviously not. And I'm going to be using the stitches that we have, and you can go into any of the loops really here that you prefer. And I've already had a go with this one because I wasn't quite sure which I'd be using. But I'm going to be using this very, very front loop that we have here. So it's got gone through part of it there. That's bad, isn't it? There we go. Through this third loop that we have here of this yarn over slip stitch. And then I'm going to be going through into the main parts of the stitch the other side. But have a go with the ones that you have in front of you. See what works for you best and what you prefer. So where's my working yarn? Here it is. I've got all sorts of tails and ends here. So we are literally just going to slip stitch through, matching a stitch for a stitch, making sure that you capture the stitch in the row that you've just done and then the first row. And it doesn't take very long, so have a go and see if you like the texture that it gives you. And if not, have a go with a different loop or two, depending on how you would like this finish. It won't be very noticeable as a seam, whichever you choose anyway, because there's lots of texture in this rib. So just go for it and match these stitches up, and then when you've finished, you can break your yarn and you can weave in that end. Okay then, we are now ready to add the neckband around our neckline, and just like with the bottom rib, this can be as big or as small as you want it to be in terms of the size, the depth of your rib band. And also, if you don't want to add one, you don't have to add one. You can finish your neckline like this, which will be a much squarer style, whereas if you put the neckband on, it will pull it in slightly and make it rounder for you. So if you want to try one and you don't think it suits you, then don't worry about it. But if you want to add one, then this is how we're going to do it. So I've got the front facing me, and we know that because we've got the back. We added that short row to the bottom of the raglan to notch the back up a little bit. I can't think of how to say it, but you know what I mean. It's higher at the back, so that's how we know it's the back. And for that reason, it's really important to identify that, because I want us to join at the back so that there is going to be a seam where we join for the neckband ribbing, and it won't be hugely noticeable, but if we can add it to the back, then that's much better than at the front. So rotate your work so that you can then find, I would go in this back corner here, but you can do it anywhere you like, really. You can just where you think it's not going to be as noticeable. So we're going to join our yarn, and very much like we did with the bottom rib, we are going to chain a certain amount, and again this is entirely up to you, but I'm going to make mine 6 stitches, I think, for this size that I'm making. So that means 7 chains. So then for our right side facing us, we are going to be working slip stitches in the back bump of each. So I'm just going to go straight in there and work a slip stitch in each of these. And now I should have said before I started here that there are a couple of options for your neckline depending on how tight or loose you would like it to be, or the style that you would like it to be. Now on the version that I am wearing in the pictures, I just did slip stitches in the back loop only for every single row of the rib, because that's how I wanted it styled on me. It gives you quite a tight and high neckline. But my husband, who is going to be the recipient of this one, doesn't want that. So I'm going to show you an option to avoid using this all slip stitches. So just like we did for the bottom rib, when you get to the first row being completed, you're going to slip stitch in just 1 stitch there. Now, if we're doing the tight neckband that you'll see on me, then you're going to turn and you're then going to work slip stitches in the back loop only of each of these stitches. But for this version, I'm actually going to work a yarn over slip stitch in the back loop, just like we did with the bottom rib. So what we'll end up doing is working alternate rows of slip stitches and yarn over slip stitches, and then all be working into the back loop only. And yes, the first 2 rows are very fiddly, as you can see. I will say that they are absolutely worth it. So then when you finish that row, we're going to turn our work, and then we are going to chain 1, and then we're going to work a slip stitch in the back loop only of each of these stitches along. There's only a few of them, so it takes a lot less time than the bottom rib does. And then after we've done, we just joined in one for that first row, and just like the bottom rib, we're going to join in two for all of the subsequent ones that we get back to. So slip stitch in two, then you're ready to turn your work, and then you're going to yarn over slip stitch in the back loop only of each of them. So it's almost exactly the same as the bottom rib, just that on the right side we're going to be working just a row of slip stitches in the back loop rather than yarn over slip stitches. And there we go, we're going to turn again, and you see here this beautiful texture, and then we chain one and slip stitch in that back loop, and we slip stitch in the next two, and you're ready to turn, and off you go again. So work all the way around this neckline, joining as you go, and then when you get back to here, meet me back and we'll just slip stitch this together to finish the neckline. So here we are, I've done that final row and we're all joined in, and now what we need to do is just as we did with the bottom band, we're going to slip stitch these together. So we have 6 stitches across here and 6 across here, and we're just going to slip stitch into them. But first I'm going to check that I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6. There we go. Because of my slip stitches, I wasn't quite sure where it began there. There's the first one, and we go across to this one, which is of course where we joined our yarn, and then the second one we slip stitch in there and across to here. Now you might find that where you did that foundation chain, they're trickier to get into than in this final row of stitches that you have here, so just go steady. And there we have it. You're now ready to break that yarn, and that is your neckband complete. You just need to weave in that last end that we have there, and that will be that section done. Okay, so time for some sleeves. Now we have the sleeve hole here. We obviously have one on each side, and to begin our sleeves, if you remember, we did do a number of rounds continuing in the herringbone half double crochet stitch down here at the bottom of the body, and we need to now do a few rounds here to match that. So I just wanted to then make a quick point about your sleeves and about the seam that are on the sleeves. And when we're decreasing on the arms, I will show you, we have just this kind of tiny little look of a seam that we have here. It's really not that noticeable, but I feel like it's one of those things that once you know it's there, you know it's there. So the ideal for me would be for this to be on the back of the sleeve. And that works brilliantly when you're working, what I've done here, the right hand sleeve, because you will join, as I'm about to show you, you will join underneath the arm. And so when you do that, where are we? When you do that underneath the arm, the seam will travel in this direction and it will travel to the back of the sleeve. So then the front of the sleeve is completely as we would want it to be, and like it doesn't look terrible. So please don't worry if you're getting like where do I join, where do I not join. It really doesn't matter. But if you would like to try and keep this little section at the back, then what you need to do is on this side, as I'm just about to show you, join under the arm as I'm going to show you, but with this side, the one that you're going to be working towards the front of the sweater, this is the front of our neckline here, you are going to need to join further back around the back of the sleeve point here, because then the seam will move forward and towards under the arm. So rather than joining under the arm here for this sleeve, I would recommend that you join much further back here in the sleeve. You'll see in the pattern that different sizes have a different number of rounds to decrease on the sleeve, and because of that you'll need to start back a different amount of stitches. So in the pattern, have a look as to how many decrease rounds you need for the size that you're making, and then just count back that many stitches from here, and then I would join your yarn and then start working. And the sleeve instructions are exactly the same. You work exactly the same way as you do the other sleeve. It's just the point at which you start. If you would like to keep that slight seam at the back of your sleeve, just bear that in mind. So to begin with, you're going to have the right side facing you, and you are going to join to the first stitch of this underarm chain that we have here. So for the size that I'm making here, I had 4 underarm chains, so you're going to join to the first of those, she says, as the yarn is nowhere near it needs to be. And we are going to join, work a chain, and then, sorry, it's really hard because it's behind me there, it makes it hard to see, but you know this anyway, you know these stitches. We're going to work herringbone half double crochet stitches, and we're going to do 1 for each stitch around. And the first 3 rounds that we're going to do of this, which will match what we did for the body, are going to be the same stitch count. So you're going to carry on without decreasing or changing the sleeves at all here. So once you've done your underarm chain, you're then going to be going into the actual stitches around the sleeve here. So work your way around, all the way around this area, back around, all the way until we get back to the first one. And just as we did with the raglan section here, we're going to be working in continuous rounds. So make sure when you get back to the start there, you grab your stitch marker and you put a marker in the first stitch of your next round so you can keep track. So work all the way around, 3 rounds of that, and then meet me back and we will start working the moss section that we're going to do for the main part of the sleeve. Okay, so I've completed those 3 rounds, and I'm now going to take the stitch marker out of that first stitch, and I am going to slip stitch to join, because we're now going to change back to working this herringbone, or not back to, we are going to change to start working the herringbone moss stitch that we did for the main body here. And if you remember, we had a setup round. It's going to be exactly the same as it was for the body. Working in joined rounds now, we're going to chain 1, and then we are going to herringbone half double crochet in this stitch. So that's our first one. Then we need to chain 1 because we're going to create a space, aren't we, for when we come back to the next round, and we will work down into it. And then we herringbone, I still can't say it the right way around, herringbone half double crochet in the next. Then we chain 1, we skip 1, and then we work into the next. So we do that all the way around this sleeve edge, skip 1, and then we work into the next one. So work your way around doing this setup round here for the round 1 of this part of the sleeve, and then slip stitch in your first join, and then we'll just have a recap of how we do the moss stitch, and then after that I will show you how we do some decreasing for the sleeves. So there we go, I've completed that round. I've got a chain 1 here, and I'm going to slip stitch into that first stitch to join. And then you may remember that we started the next round of this moss stitch by chaining 2, so that then that creates us our chain 1 space for the next round to use. And then we're going to work a moss stitch down into the back loop of that stitch 2 rounds below. Then we chain 1, and then we work a moss stitch over the top of that chain 1 space that we have into the back loop of that stitch below us there. So it's just the same as we did for the body rounds. So work the rounds that you need to of this moss stitch just as we did for the body, for the amount of rounds that it tells you in the pattern for the size you're making, before you need to do a decrease round. Now the decrease rounds are evenly spaced on all of the sleeves, but obviously some will need more decreases than others depending on the size that you're making. So follow along in the pattern for this moss stitch, but then when you come to a decrease round, come back to me and I will show you how we do one of those. When you're ready to work one of the decrease rounds, you'll see in the pattern that it's always on a round that begins with a moss stitch. So I've slip stitched into that second chain of my chain 2 here, and I'm ready to start as I would normally with the moss stitch by chaining 1 and then working a moss stitch into this stitch here. However, when we're on a decrease round, what we want to do is go over this stitch and this stitch. So we're going to work over 1 stitch at the top here over 2 stitches that we have here. So that looks like this. We're going to yarn over, and we're going to go into that stitch that we have there as we would normally, and we're going to pull through and we're going to start the herringbone stitch that we have there. But rather than complete that stitch, we're going to yarn over again, and then we're going to start working into the next one. So we completely ignore this stitch in the middle that we have here, and we're going to work just into the back loop of that one, so almost just pretending to work another herringbone moss stitch that we have there. And then you're going to yarn over and you're going to pull through all of the loops on the hook that you have. And so that has decreased what we have there, 1, 2 and 3 stitches from the round below down into 1. And that's the only difference in the whole of this round that we have. So we're going to chain 1, and then you'll carry on and you'll work your moss stitch all the way around as you would normally. So it's only over that first stitch that we create that we actually do our decrease. And so I'll undo it and I'll show you again. We'll go over it again, I think, because I was like, there's no more to show you than that. And once you've got the knack of that, you'll be absolutely fine. So we are aiming to decrease over these 2 stitches that we have here, 2 rounds below. So we're going to chain 1, we're going to yarn over and start our herringbone moss stitch there. And then before we complete it, we'll yarn over and then we'll go into the next one that we have. And then we actually complete the stitch while we're in there. And then we chain 1 and you carry on as usual. And as I say, that will only happen on a round that begins with a moss stitch rather than begins with a chain. And what's the other thing to say? There was something else I was thinking. The other thing to say is the fact that that then decreases that stitch count by 2. So although we've just done 1 decrease, that decreases the whole of the stitch count of this round by 2. So for each decrease round that you have, that's all you have to do. Now I do find it useful to use a stitch marker for these decrease rounds because it slants so far to the side. Once you've done that first stitch, it can be quite tricky to find it when you arrive back at the beginning again. So do use the stitch marker if you feel you need to in there to make sure you know where your first stitch is. So work around as per written in the pattern for the length of the sleeve and the decrease of the sleeve. I've given different options there for different arms. However, this is your sleeve. If you're making it for yourself or for someone else that is near you, the great thing about this now is that you can put it on, you can try it on, and you can work out where your decreases, where you want them to be. You don't have to put decreases in at all. You can keep it as a straight sleeve. It's entirely up to you. So work your sleeve to the point where you then want to add your sleeve cuff, and then meet me back here and we will put the cuff on. But you'll be happy to know that you've already done everything that you need to know to put that cuff on. Here we are then on this sleeve. I have decreased to the size that I need it to be, and I have got 1 more round to do, and I thought I'd just show you again how we do it. It's exactly the same as we closed the bottom of the body. So this last round I have chained 1, and then I'm going to go straight into that first stitch that we have there. I'm going to work a single crochet, but obviously if you have the other version where you have a space to work a moss stitch, then you do that moss stitch there. And then I'm going to do a moss stitch down into that stitch 2 rounds below, and then I'm ready to do a single crochet in that next stitch there. So we're going to work all the way around, working rather than a chain 1 to create a space as we have been doing. We're going to work a single crochet into where our herringbone half double crochet is on the round below. So work all the way around, closing those gaps, and then slip stitch in your first to join. Then we'll be ready to add the join as you go cuff. Here we are back at the start again, and I've slip stitched into that first stitch. And what we're going to do to work this cuff is it's going to be, well, you have a choice. It can be a loose cuff and you can work it the same as the bottom ribbing. It can be a medium cuff and you work it the same as the neckband, or you can have a very cinched in and tight cuff and you can work just slip stitches. So it's entirely up to you. So if you want a loose cuff like the bottom band, you're going to be working yarn over slip stitches in the back loop only. If you want a regular cuff, which I think is what I'm going to do here, we're going to work alternate rows like we did the neckband of slip stitches and then yarn over slip stitches. Or if you would like a tight and cinched in one, you're just going to be working slip stitches in the back loop only. So I would recommend perhaps with this first cuff of yours just to have a go for a few rows and see which you like best. And then obviously if you have the person that you're making this for, or you're making it for yourself, try it on and see what you think, see how far you'd like it to be cinched in for you. But whichever you're doing, you can do it to whichever length you like. In the pattern, I think I have recommended, oh, I may be getting this wrong, but I think I've recommended that it needs to be 8 stitches long. So for that then, I'm going to chain 9. If that isn't correct, I do apologise, but it just goes to show that you can do it to any length that you like, because in fact I've done the ones on my version definitely shorter than this, but you go for it and make yours as long as you would like them. And then as we work back down, just as we did with the neckline, for this version I'm going to work a slip stitch into that back bump of each of those across, back down this chain that we made. And then if you remember, the first time we get back, we're just going to slip stitch into 1 stitch before we then turn. And then we're going to yarn over slip stitch in the back loop only of each of them. But this is the point where if you wanted to, you could work just slip stitches here. It gives this that's what I did, sorry, on the children's version of this sweater. But it's entirely up to you as to how close you want your sleeve cuff to be. And then just like with the neckband, we are going to turn and we're going to chain 1 and then we'll slip stitch into the back loop only of each of these along here. So again, like all our ribs, the stitch count remains the same. Oh, I've not done that one very well, have I? There we go. But then from now on in, once we get back to where our last round is here of the sleeve that we're going to join to, we now need to slip stitch into the next 2 here. So there we have 1 and there we have 2, and then we'll turn and we're on a yarn over slip stitch row. So then into the back loop and work our yarn over slip stitches. So work that repeat all the way around the edge of the sleeve cuff and then back to the start, and you're going to join with a slip stitch seam just as we did with the neckband here to join your sleeve cuff. Thank you so much for joining me to make this crochet sweater together. I can't wait to see the versions that you've made and who you've made them for. So do come and find me. I'm Hanjan Crochet across all the social media platforms you'd expect me to be. And I'm always coming up with new designs and new patterns, so I will definitely see you again soon.